My name is Christopher Jerome Hurd, and I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. I am principal of an interior design firm called Hendrick, and it's been quite a journey getting here. So I was born in Smith Station, Alabama. It was the country. Houses were a quarter-mile apart, and we all had our way of getting to our cousins' houses. Growing up there in the 60s, it was very joyful in a lot of ways. Obviously, there are a lot of connotations about the South in the 60s, and some of them are very true when it came to race. But in our world, it was all about the positive aspects and the belief that you could change your world and hopefully change people's minds and perceptions of you. Faith was a big part of growing up there too. And I think the community then probably was most captured in going to church. Everybody knew everyone because it was a small congregation. And everybody, in a sense, took care of each other. There was an excitement there, and that community helped. Once you sort of express an aptitude or an ability, or even just connecting, people were always very, very encouraging. And so that gives you a little bit of a confidence. It certainly helped shape who I am now, being influenced by all of those people that were a part of my life. And in some regards, some of them still are still a part of my life. So elementary school, the schools were still segregated. And then from 3rd grade to 4th grade, the schools integrated. And it was pretty scary, I think, as kids, because we knew each other. And then there were even kids, Black kids, African-American kids from other parts of the county that we were all put in this situation. And I think we all sort of clung to each other in a way so that we felt a little bit secure as we were getting, things thrown at us, not so nice things. I think as a kid, when you sort of have it in your face every day, some of the negativity and the name calling, it was pretty scary. But you had the comfort of your home and your family and the encouragement of that, saying, hang in there, you're gonna be fine. Where I grew up, we were rural and pretty poor. And so there was not a bathroom attached to our house. We still had an outhouse until I was about in the 6th grade. And we added a bathroom to the house. And I remember seeing it go up, seeing, just local builders building this attachment to the house. And I went in there one day and there was a window, but it was right at the shower, and I knew it was gonna get wet. And I went and say, hey, Ma, I think we need to move that window so it doesn't get wet and rotten out. And so I think that was my first architectural decision when I was probably 11 or 12. And then Phoenix City and Columbus, Smith Station is a suburb of those two areas. And when people start to buy land and build houses, I would go into that house during construction after the crew left and just look at things and look at the plans. And then we would steal nails so we could build forts in the woods. So. Having that visual connection, I think it's always been a part of me. And it really kind of led me towards something I really couldn't define at that point. And so I think when I got into my junior and senior year, we had to do papers on a biography of a famous American. And I did Frank Lloyd Wright. And it wasn't just because, I think it was a combination of architecture, it had to be. Being able to really build something that you could play in almost in a way was really fascinating to me. So that's what led me to architecture as a career option. My first couple of years in the School of Architecture, I was the only Black person there. An advisor that I credit with helping me get through and navigate a lot of the situations in college that came up. Her name was Betty Finley, and she was an advisor at the School of Architecture. And I had a particular professor who, to put it just bluntly, he was a racist. And I had been placed in his studio. And I walked into her office and I said, I've been placed into this person's class. And she said, don't say another word. And she switched me to another studio. She goes, you need to have a level playing field, and that's going to be an uphill battle for you, and I want you to succeed. You know, as anybody that gets a design or architecture education, you're at the building all hours of the night, you know, and I remember being there one night, and the janitorial staff came in, and there were two gentlemen, and they had been working at the university for a long time and in that particular building, and they had not seen another Black kid there. These were African-American gentlemen, Black gentlemen, and they would, you know, engage me and ask me about, you know, what we were doing there. And one night they gave me like $50 out of their own pockets. And I said, I can't take this. And they said, no, you will take this because we are so proud of you. And that was encouragement. I felt like, oh my God, I can't let them down. And a sense of somebody that looks like us is doing it. When I moved to Atlanta in 1985, probably in 1989, some friends and I were walking through this neighborhood, and I was like, oh my God, one day I wish I could live in Ansley Park in Atlanta. And when this opportunity came, I said, okay, here's my chance. Coming through the front door, there's a history and a connection to my family, my mother most prominently. And placing her there as the matriarch of the house, I hope that's communicating something about me and the way that I feel about making connections and being just close to people. It's just a great feeling. I don't know quite how to explain it. I can say that I'm proud of where I'm from, and I think that's reflected in my home. But I'm also proud of what I've learned to help me create this environment. I shared a story, hypothetically, that if I were walking from my office through this neighborhood, I fully expect one day, not premeditating it, but I fully expect and would not be surprised by someone stopping me saying, where are you going? Who are you? Why are you here? If not something worse. I won't be surprised. I'll be hurt, I'll be angry, I'll be all those emotions, but I wouldn't be surprised. Always in the back of my mind, I think it's always in the back of any Black person's mind or minority person's mind, anything could happen at any moment. When the incidents with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, for me as an African American, that took me back to a place that I had thought. I will tell you this, every minority knows that things aren't just exponentially better, but there has been probably more tolerance. But when things like that happen, you know that there's this sort of underlying beast, if you will, that's still there, and that it goes a little sleepy, but then you see actions like that and you go like, oh my God, I had prayed that things like that wouldn't happen anymore, but they do. What is going on here? Why is this animosity is still so prevalent. I don't understand it, because if I didn't have, growing up, if I didn't have hope, I wouldn't be sitting here. And the compassion of others to help me through my journey to get here. And with something, with the things that we've gone through in this past year, and seeing the lack of compassion it's heartbreaking, and it hurts. But we move on, and we have the patience to see a change in people. It's ironic, but the name of the church that I grew up in was Good Hope. I'm hopeful that I can provide an influence on someone that will have a huge impact on their life. The mentors that I have had, they were critical in my development, because literally it took me 30 years, plus years, to get where I am now. And the path and the journey that I took, I wouldn't change it for anything. I tell you, for me, the joy has outweighed the difficult times. There's just something that feels right. And when it feels right, that will bring you more joy than anything.
How can we create opportunities for other people that maybe don't have opportunities or know how to find opportunities? And then how do we have a great impact for the end user?
If you see someone who looks like you doing something, you're like, oh, well, maybe I can do that too.
For us, design really is a holistic approach to life problems.
Welcome to Metropolis Sustainable Product Spotlight. I'm Senior Editor Kelly Beamon. And today we're delving into the innovative practices at manufacturer Aquafil. Aquafil is the longtime producer of the material Econyl, which is a recycled nylon that's widely used in other companies' carpeting and flooring. So if you specify products by Interface, Floor, Tarkett, or Milliken, among others, you use this yarn. That's important because it's made from 100% waste material. In fact, the company recycles 100 million pounds of nylon waste each year producing it, and it carries a helpful environmental product declaration, which is great for earning those LEED credits. Even better, now Econyl is available for use in the production of furniture. Most recently, the ergonomically designed Move Chair by New Zealand manufacturer NoHo. With me to share how Aquafil's methods and this new partnership evolved is Giulio Bonazzi, the company's chairman, CEO, and the inventor of its recycling process, along with Richard Shirtcliffe, the co-CEO of NoHo. Welcome. I figured let's start with the story of how Aquafil's unique carpet recycling program has grown, and feel free to share details about the program you recently acquired for that purpose, Giulio, if you don't mind.
Thank you. Well, our journey started more than 15 years ago when we had to admit that the way we were making nylon was wrong, and that in the long term, this would have led us to some problems because, of course, highly dependency on oil, a lot of energy intensive products, So, I mean, clearly it was just a matter of time. And thanks to the magic fact that nylon can return to the original building blocks, we really invented this system of infinitely recycling nylon waste. Of course, it's easy to say, but I mean, we should take much longer than the time we have today to explain, because the process begins with rescuing of waste, which means that we have to go all over the places around the world and looking for products at the end of life, some of them particularly ugly, like fishing nets or carpets, and then we have to take them back to our plant, destroy in the sense that we have to divide the different materials that are making the product themselves, and then of course applying this infinite recycling methodology, which is Econyl. Of course, at the end we obtain something which is exactly identical of the nylon coming from oil, and this is very helpful to create whatever products, like for example the NoHo chair, in order to really give to the consumer beautiful products, because if they are not looking great, nobody will buy them. So this is basically the process that we are going through.
Awesome. Richard, was circularity always a part of your vision for NoHo?
It was, yeah. We actually set, we pronounce it NoHo in New Zealand, but that's another story. It's the reason we pronounce it that way is it's an indigenous Maori word. It means to sit, to stay, to dwell, to live. And many of the drivers, the values-based drivers for the setup of the business have actually come out of Te Ao Māori, the world of Māori. One of them being he hiritanga, which means to make better things in a better way. And those things were drivers for us right from the foundations of Noho as a business. Noho as a business is actually a spin out of an existing business that has been creating extraordinary performance ergonomic chairs for the office for decades. That business is called Formway. And the designers within Formway had identified the fact that we go to the office to sit on these extraordinary chairs, and then we come home and we sit on static chairs that are not good for our bodies. And we also tend to, in this hyper consumerist world, we tend to replace our furniture with increasing rapidity. And there was an opportunity to create something, A, that lasts for a lifetime, B, that when eventually, if it does, it ceases to be usable, it can be returned back into the development chain, and 3, that it's better for the human body to sit on. So yeah, those were key drivers for us right from the get-go.
Perfect. That sounds like it made for a perfect partnership with Econyl. How would you say, Giulio, that Econyl moves the furniture category forward?
Well, thanks to Econyl, you can really make products without any compromise in terms of aesthetics and performance. And you can make them out of a recycled raw material, and you can also design them in order to be recycled at the end. Or if you want, you can also repair. So this very much depends on how you design the product. That is why it's very important for us to work together with companies that, are innovative and that share our values, like this beautiful case. So we work with many different companies in the fashion industry. We have more than 2,000 customers, and among them, people like Gucci, Prada, Stella McCartney, Burberry, and as you can imagine, we are very proud of it. In the carpet flooring industry, you mentioned before Interface and the Tarkett and the Milliken, so the most important ones. And now we want to do the same in the furniture industry. So we really need to look for the best customers and to collaborate with them.
Got it. In fact, you have so many partnerships. Can you tell me the total number of commercial products that designers might find Econyl in?
Well, to give you the exact number is very difficult because I know more the number of customers, but there are really thousands of products. In the carpet flooring industry, please remember that Aquafil in the commercial section is maybe the largest nylon fiber producer in the world. We have production plants in Europe, in USA, and in Asia. So we really serve especially the global clients as well as all the major carpet producer locally. In the fashion industry, more than 2,000 different customers. In the design and let's say molding industry for plastic application, we have a lot of customers working in the sunglasses industry, and now in the chair, tables and lamps. For example, we also work with Tom Dixon as a designer, you know. So we really enjoy a lot of beautiful customers that teach us how beautiful can be production of this kind of products.
Of course. What is, or is there another product in the offing between the two of you, your companies?
Richard can tell how difficult it was for them to develop this product. You know, you have to test it, you know. I mean, it's so comfy, so beautiful. You have to try it.
Richard, you want to?
Yeah, look, it took 5 years to birth this one product, and yes, we have other products coming down the line, but the process of developing ergonomic furniture is not a speedy one. So yeah, look, we would love to work more with Aquafil. We've really enjoyed the partnership, and I think the product, the Hall Move chair, speaks for itself as regards the power of that combination. But yeah, you'll have to wait and see.
Oh, I'm sure. Would you give me one example of how the Econyl material is incorporated into your production for this chair? I know that there's injection molding that's involved. Can you just explain it a little bit, Richard?
Yeah, it's a hell of a process. So if you've seen the chair, you'll know that that there are components of it that are utterly unique. The cradle of it is designed with what's called an auxetic pattern, and it's quite counterintuitive. It's essentially a mesh which can expand in all 4 dimensions essentially at once when someone sits on it. So it makes it very compliant. It allows it to rock and flex. The entirety of the chair, aside from 6 brass bolts, is made from recycled material. So in order to do that, we really needed to create a standalone set of tools and a standalone machine, and we had to make all of that. It actually molds the chair on that tool within that machine. In order to do that successfully, particularly the auxetic cradle has about 1 million different little tiny connection points onto the tool. So as you can imagine, it took us a little while to perfect that. But unfortunately, I can't cut in the middle of a Zoom to a small video of the production line. If I could, you'd understand.
Oh,
it's reasonably
I think
intense.
we may be able to. I hope so. I want to say in conclusion, I really love the idea of an ergonomic chair, especially for any environment, for home, for the office, something that looks at home in both environments. I also, of course, love the idea that given Econyl's applications, we no longer need to specify petroleum-based nylon anymore. You know, it sounds like this is quite an evolution. The product, you know, it just seems like it's going to really push a lot of other products forward. So I think it's great that we now have this option.
Yeah, look, there is really no need for us to be continuing to pull oil out of the earth to create plastics. You know, there's so much of it washing around just in the ocean. There's so much of it that can be repurposed. And what's glorious about what Julio and team have done is that they found a way to do that. And we can get back to, I mean, you know, we live in this consumerist world. We do buy new products. Old products wear out and we have to find new ones, but we can look for better products that actually can last a lifetime and can be recycled at end of life. And all of that is to the betterment of the planet. So we've got to keep doing that.
To conclude, this product, Econyl, contributes to a 90% reduction in global warming compared with petroleum-based nylon. So it's really great to now have this option for so many commercial products. Thank you for joining us for Metropolis Sustainable Spotlight with Aquafil.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's discussion. We're going to talk today about getting interiors to net zero. There's a lot to talk about net zero out there in the world. Lots of big organizations have made significant climate pledges and have pledged to get to carbon neutrality. A lot of cities and states in the United States are following suit, and in Canada as well. Canada is, as usual, one step ahead of us on some of this stuff. But interiors still remains a new frontier for carbon reduction. And part of this is because we have previously underestimated the carbon footprint of interiors within the life of a building. At Metropolis, we published some research at the end of last year, borne out by work done by several firms around the country and by the Carbon Leadership Forum, shout out to them, that shows that the real sort of carbon emissions associated with interior design are involved with the renovation process. So over the life of a building stands for, say, 100 years, 80 years. The interiors are changed many times over, and it doesn't matter what type of interior it is, whether it's in workplace, where the cycle is about 5 years, whether it's in healthcare, where the cycle is about 10 years, whether it's in hospitality, where the cycle can be shorter, or in multifamily residential, especially in rentals, where the cycle can be shorter. There's constant churn of renovations. Every time interiors are renovated, there's new flooring, new furniture, new lighting, new walls, new ceiling material that's being brought into the project. And all of those have carbon emissions associated with them. So, and our estimates show that those carbon emissions over the life of a building can add up to equal to the structure and envelope, core and shell, that is the building structure itself, which is where most of our efforts have been focused on so far. So interiors have a huge role to play in getting us to a net zero future and a carbon neutral future, and in helping us address climate change. But exactly how do we do that? There's a lot of folks involved in trying to find answers for that, and we have 3 of them here with us today. We have with us John Pendorf, who's a senior associate and sustainability leader and senior project manager at Perkins & Will. John, such a pleasure to have you with us today. We have Ryan Poole, who's a global sustainability leader at DPR Construction. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. And Giulio Bonazzi, who's the chairman and CEO of Aquafil Group. Thank you for joining us, Giulio. Today's webinar is also brought to you in partnership with Aquafil Group. So Aquafil, thank you so much for making today's discussion possible. Just a reminder before we get started in our discussion that we are ready to take your questions at any time during today's discussion. Our discussion will run for about an hour today. Every time you have a question, please put it into the Q&A box. Don't use chat or raise your hand. We're not going to be looking at those today. Please put them into Q&A box where you put in where you were coming from, and we can take those. We'll start to take those questions in just a few minutes. Okay. Let's start with John. John, first of all, kudos. Your office recently made a commitment to having your interiors be net zero carbon by 2030. That is a first of its kind in the United States and a big commitment. Tell us about why you made that commitment and how you foresee it influencing your interiors work.
Thanks, Avi. Our office did make a commitment earlier this year to reducing embodied carbon in our commercial interiors work with the gradual goal of elimination by 2030. We are looking at it as an incremental goal, sort of modeled after the Architecture 2030 challenge for architecture and base building. There's a lot of talk in the design industry about reducing carbon, but a lot of times it's focused on operational carbon. And we see that as related to energy consumption in a lot of primary ways. Commercial office buildings over their lifetime, as you said, will make incremental improvements for environmental efficiency, for energy efficiency, lowering the operational carbon from when it was originally designed. But tenant spaces turn over every 5 to 10 years, which is just a gradual increase in embodied carbon over the lifetime of the building. And as you said, it doesn't matter what type of use it is. Every refresh, every new set of finishes, every reconfiguration, that's additional embodied carbon that's going in and out of the building. So we saw this as an opportunity to start the dialogue internally as well as with our clients to reducing embodied carbon in our work. It's something that we feel like people need to be starting to talk about as the next frontier in sustainability. We also wanted to hold ourselves accountable for making informed decisions in our design work. So since our launch of our initiative, we've worked over the past several months to educate ourselves on how to account for embodied carbon and to use the tools available to designers as part of our design process. Ultimately, we see our commitment to lowering embodied carbon as a renewed commitment to sustainability, one that dovetails nicely with the overall commitment Perkins & Will has made firm-wide, as well as a way to enhance the design narrative for our clients.
Thanks so much, John. Just a quick primer for anybody who's listening to some of the terms that John used and is hearing them for the first time. We talk about carbon emissions in the build sector in two forms, operational and embodied carbon. You heard John speak about that. And I think, John, you really explained well how, as our buildings get more efficient and also, as solar energy becomes or renewable energy becomes more available, there's so many ways in which the energy that it takes to operate a building, so operational carbon, the energy that you're using when you turn on the light switch, right? That is actually coming down. The carbon emissions associated with that is coming down. But every time you refresh the interiors, you're adding to what is called embodied carbon, which is basically the emissions that have already been put in the atmosphere to make all the stuff that's coming into your building project, right? And that embodied carbon is only going up for a building over the life of a building. Some quick numbers here. I'd like to remind everyone of a 40, 50, 10 kind of number. Just remember that 40, 50, 10. 40% of the world's carbon emissions come from the built environment. So the stuff that all of us on this call work on, that's 40% of the world's carbon emissions come from the work that we do. About 50% of that, or eventually close to 50% of that, is going to be embodied carbon, which is, embedded, which is emissions associated with making products. And so we're going to have Julia talk about that, I'm sure, in a little bit. And by some estimates, because of that 40-50 number, interior designers have influence over about 1/10 of the world's carbon emissions. Because if we consider that interiors are roughly equal to core and shell in a building, and each of them are responsible for about half the embodied carbon, interior designers have influence of over 10% of the world's carbon emissions, roughly. So 40, 50, 10, just remember that. We're going to come to Ryan. Ryan, DPR is no stranger to net zero construction. You guys have built a couple of net zero facilities, especially your own offices, most recently in Sacramento. Metropolis was very happy to cover that. What have you learned from those projects, and how do you think we can bring that approach to interior builds, especially from the point of view of the construction specialists, the contractors on the project?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Avi. Yeah, so we've got 6 of our own offices that are net zero energy, and a couple more on the way, and we're doing them for clients as well, and so super excited about that. And as John kind of mentioned, we've been on, focusing on an operational carbon for some time now within the built environment, right? But embodied carbon has become, more relative recently, and so what we're really trying to understand is how to continue to drive more transparency behind the materials that we do use. I think that's first and foremost where the industry's got to continue to go is transparency behind how things are manufactured. What does that life cycle analysis look like? So that we can actually understand on our end, what are the right materials for us to use. Another big approach is been early collaboration. So an integrated project delivery method where you have all team players in the conceptual phase of the project, working together collaboratively. We found that is by and large one of the most valuable approaches when you're trying to deliver a high performing building, and focusing particularly on low embodied carbon materials with interiors, because of where the market is right now, they can be a little more difficult to source, right? And so in order for us to create economic value and driving towards market rates with these type of solutions, you've got to have the team together as early as possible to really start that collaboration, look at constructability and the cost of it, so that we don't get into a value engineering exercise and sustainability starts getting hacked off at the beginning. So big proponents there is continuing to drive transparency, and that means that our design teams, our owners, and everybody have to continue, and contractors have to continue to ask vendors and manufacturers for that information, so that we have a more wide variety of products that have that available. And then one last term I'll throw in there with all of this to bring to the group is circular economy, right? So when we're thinking about how all this affects our triple bottom line, when we're looking at the natural resources that we have available to build with and the embodied carbon within them, it's really looking at, if it's a non-raw renewable resource, how can we reuse it? How can we recycle it? And how do we drive recycled content up within the products that we are making? So super excited, to continue to try to figure out what are the solutions. Low embodied carbon concrete. We utilize mass timber, you mentioned, in that Sacramento office, and looked at the offset comparison to other building materials, right? And then, equated that to what does that look like, in relative terms that people will understand, cars being taken off the road and things like that. And so I think those comparisons help everyone, start to bring it to reality of what we're really talking about with carbon, which is really just pollution, right? And how do we continue to diminish that pollution line?
Thanks so much, Ryan. Thank you so much. I mean, those are 4 key strategies there, and it really builds on what John was saying. I mean, John was talking about how, his firm's commitment fits into a larger commitment, to climate action. So, carbon reduction has wide-ranging, effects, as you just said, on health, on pollution, air quality, all sorts of things, besides, of course, being more efficient for the Earth's resources. So that's really important. But the second thing, John spoke about working with all the different stakeholders. And I think, Ryan, you kind of laid out why that's important as well. First of all, materials transparency. So working with manufacturers to make sure that the components that are going into the product. Second, you talked about, forming teams early, right? And doing an integrated project delivery. So changing the way you work might be important, and finding partners is really important. Third, you spoke about circular principles. We'll have Julia speak about that a little bit more in just a minute here, because that's really important. Like, we have to think about circularity at the product scale, but also at the project scale. How do we waste less? How do we reuse more? And the fourth thing that you spoke about is, really looking to those future, looking to how we communicate what we're doing, how we talk about that. How do we talk to clients, and how do we talk to those stakeholders about sort of what our mission is and why it matters? And I'm sure we're going to dig into that more. Any of you who are on this call, if you want to dig into any of those aspects a little bit more, go ahead and put your questions in Q&A. We'll take those in just a minute here. Julio, Econyl by Aquafil is, it's a carpet fiber. It is now, relies on no virgin plastic, relies on basically no virgin fossil fuel-based material for its production. That's a great example of circularity. As in general, you're very committed to circular principles. Can you talk about, how that fits into this effort to bring down the carbon emissions of interior design?
Well, thank you, Avi. You're right. Econyl started as a carpet yarn that has been used by the major carpet manufacturers, which at the end of the day is also part of the interior, sometimes also a difficult part to recycle. And then we have developed together with some partners fabrics that can go for upholstery. And now also we have moved to making engineering plastic that can go to make, chairs, tables, lamps, whatever kind of material that is demanding plastic. So nylon is an incredibly performing polymer, and that can go for many different applications. And Econyl is a nylon, but instead of using oil or oil derivatives, is entirely coming from waste. waste such as fishing nets, but also circular waste, so waste that we collect from our clients and that we can collect from post-consumer sources, like, for example, carpet recycling. So the point is when you need, nylon or plastics or fibers that can also be not nylon, but that you can convert into nylon, Econyl can be a solution that has 90% lower carbon footprint. How does this come from? About 70% is so-called lower embedded energy. So the process of recycling nylon waste, the process we are using is 70% lower energy consumption than drilling oil, transporting oil, refining oil, and making nylon from petroleum. Then the remaining 20% is because Aquafil has been using renewable energy all over the world already since almost 10 years, of course, when available. So we still have a small part of our process that is not using renewable energy, but whenever available, even in China, Thailand, of course, in the United States and Europe, we source renewable energy. So this is going to minus 90%. We still have about 10%, which is what? Transportation, packaging, like paper tubes or plastic, films that we need to pack our material. So we still have about 10% to go to arrive to net zero. Of course, the magic of Econyl is also that we can recycle 100% of the pre-consumer waste when they are made by our customers. So the target is not only to go to net zero carbon emission, but also net zero usage of material from the plant. So to go and save 100% of the product. So it's a long journey, but as Ryan was exactly saying, and John before Ryan, it's just about collaboration between the value chain. If we collaborate all together, we can make incredible things.
Absolutely. I think, Julia, you've laid out actually really well why materials transparency is so important. Just in one material in your interior space, which is nylon, right? There's so many considerations in terms of how to get that one material to low carbon, and then as interior designers, we have the responsibility of then, piecing together all of the materials and, building a low carbon interior out of that. And then, of course, there's the emergent effect of the products, which is, of course, how they're put together and then how they come apart, which is what Ryan was talking about in terms of, the end of life of materials. But that starting point, what are the products that our inner spaces made of, and how can those products be made as responsibly as possible? And then how do we make sure that the most responsibly made products with the lowest carbon footprints end up in our projects? That's a huge part of the puzzle here, even as we drive for the larger changes in the industry. So thank you so much, Julia, for laying that out for us. Again, we're open for questions. I see a couple of comments and questions in there. We'll take those in just a minute. We are here today with Ryan Poole from DPR Construction, John Pendorf from Perkins & Will, and Giulio Bonazzi representing Econyl by Aquafil, talking about getting interiors to net zero. A quick reminder, of course, Metropolis offers these webinars on a regular basis. We're going to have another one coming up next week. Registration details for all of that are available on our website. So please stay in touch with us. We love having these conversations with all of you. Before we move on, I have a question for all of you, which is, and maybe John, you want to start off here. What are some challenges with even assessing the carbon footprint of an interior design project? I mean, how do you know, right? We're talking about reducing, but first up, how do you even kind of get a sense of what the carbon footprint of interiors is? I know that's a big problem, and I know we don't have a perfect solution, but can you tell us like some of the pieces of that, how do we assess the carbon footprint of a project?
Sure. I think it is an incremental investigation, and it relies a lot on the transparency and collaboration that Giulio and Ryan have already alluded to. When we're researching products to put into our projects, into our designs, we're looking for a level of transparency where we can assess what is the carbon footprint of a specific product, whether that be carpet, wall covering, ceiling tiles, etc. There are tools out there for us to use. EPDs, or environmental product declarations, are the first stop. But even these, they're not all written the same, and they're not all certified by the same entity. So you have to be, there's an education that's involved on the part of the design team in terms of interpreting the data that we're given and making the best decision possible that we can. So is it a product specific EPD, or is it a more generic industry-wide EPD? Is it third-party certified and verified? These are the things that we're looking for. And then we get into even more granularity when we look at the scope. What carbon emissions is being reported? Is it just the beginning of life, or is it cradle to cradle, cradle to gate, cradle to grave? So there's a lot of information out there, and a lot of it's really good information, but you do have to sift through it. That's sort of step one. And then from there, we use our digital model to help us calculate what that environmental, what that carbon footprint is based on that material. But as you said, Avi, it's not just one material. And it's a series of trade-offs too, because we're also looking at health information, health product declarations. We're looking at recyclability and recycled content, going back to that circular economy. So there's trade-offs, and there isn't an easy solution right now, but fortunately there's more and more information on the market for us to help make decisions.
Julia and Ryan, I wonder if you have any comments on sort of, how do we start to, in your own work, and you guys are not in design, you're in manufacturing and in construction. In your work, how do you assess carbon footprints? What are the methodologies?
We at Aquafil published our first sustainability report, taking a GRS standard as our methodology back in 2007. So, for us, transparency is not a matter. And then, of course, we calculated our LCA, or environmental product declaration, according to the methodologies, and using a software which is called Gavi. It's a very complicated method. It's not something that is easy. I don't remember how many pages of formula we have to fill into this spreadsheet. But we battle with our lady. She is a lady, the one who is taking care of it. And then, of course, we collaborate with our clients. Of course, making an ingredient, we must normally follow what our clients are demanding and asking. And then to work in Europe sometimes is different than working in the US. If you go to Japan, again, another standard to cope with. But we follow normally the most important certifications that our customers are asking. And this is very important because, unfortunately, greenwashing and sometimes cheating, can be done also through this kind of numbers that are very difficult to understand. But nevertheless, if you start publishing and sharing methodologies sooner than later, it will be easy to understand who is saying what and who is saying the truth.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'd just add, Avi, the biggest thing that we've got to do is continue to drive transparency. The reality of where we are with the data that we have is that we've still got a long way to go in pushing manufacturers towards more transparent product manufacturing and allowing the public and folks that are purchasing from them to understand it more deeply. And the way that we do that is through Metropolis holding panel discussions like this where we can talk about it, engaging more owners and asking for it, and getting the design and construction community more bought into the idea and pushing it as well. And so the more and more we do that, the more transparency we'll drive. And I think the more ethical and responsible people's practices will continue to grow to be. I'll drop in the chat too. There are tons of incredible platforms out there that are continuing, as John mentioned, and Julia as well, that there's just no standardization right now. So we're still all working to figure that out. And I'll drop one in the chat that we actually use at DPR, which is an online catalog that helps us sift through products and materials that have those third-party certifications, and we'll have the EPD and HPD right there with it, and can do a life cycle analysis as well. And so I think the more we provide platforms that make it easy for our design partners and trade partners and everybody to sort through the information and find the responsible products is going to create more and more value.
Absolutely. We have a couple of questions, I think, in here that from the audience that we can start to take. And anybody else who has questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. Andy DeLisi addressed this question to John, but I think it's something that all of us, everybody can weigh in on maybe. Andy says, for John, the majority of carbon emissions in office furniture come from the extraction of virgin raw materials to manufacture new products. How many Perkins & Will interior fit-outs feature remanufactured or refurbished products? Is this going to be part of your strategy moving forward? We spoke about recycling, reuse, refurbishment. Can we talk a little bit about how we can increase the adoption of that in the industry? So John, if you want to respond first, and then Ryan, maybe you want to go next.
Sure. To answer the specific question, I don't have a number of how many projects have used repurposed, refurbished furniture. It is a strategy that we look at, and it's one, honestly, that we're going to start looking at more critically. I think thinking about the end of life of furniture in particular, there's a couple of ways that we need to attack this and attack it as an industry. We've certainly locally in the DC office of Perkins & Will, we've been having conversations very directly with furniture manufacturers about what are the realistic lifespans of the product and how can we extend lifespan beyond the lease term of an office build out. Because a lot of times pieces of furniture are actually designed to last far longer and can take a lot more wear and tear. The challenge is that they may fall out of fashion. The aesthetic itself may be the problem. So, for example, panelized workstation systems, as opposed to trashing an entire system and replacing it, could we use the skeleton of the system and use new fabrics and coverings and upholsteries to refurbish it? Also, looking at the recyclability of pieces of furniture is becoming more critical, that they're made of materials that can be disassembled easily and separated out. But I also think the end of life doesn't necessarily have to mean recycled. We do actually work with a number of clients that look to sell or donate their furniture to perhaps a local nonprofit or a resale group. So just because you're done with it doesn't mean it actually has to go into the waste stream, but it also doesn't mean recycled. It could actually be very easily repurposed or given a new life elsewhere. We're starting to explore all of those avenues a lot more actively. We just moved into our new office space that I'm sitting in right now, and we actually were able to reuse or repurpose pieces of furniture from our old office. It has the sort of dual benefit of lowering our embodied carbon, but also potentially freeing up some of your FF&E budget for other new pieces that you might need. So I think looking at it as a more holistic approach is something that we're going to start having conversations with our clients with, and finding the right solution for each project, because there's not a one size fits all.
Right.
Yeah, I'll jump onto that, Avi, and I think this actually, I can touch on Louisa's next question as well, which is, I think the important thing that I want to capitalize that John mentioned is proper selection of materials and proper design so that you can have a continued life of the asset on the back end, right? So adaptive reuse is an incredible example of this. And the building with the lowest carbon footprint is one that's already built, right? We say that kind of over and over again. And so understanding how we can utilize existing spaces, but also when we're in design for a new space, making sure that we design it so that it can be adapted for reuse on the end, the end of its current life cycle for its current purpose. So thinking about design flexibility and how we can, create a building that will continue to live a different life after its current purpose. And I think that goes hand in hand with the type of materials that you select, like John mentioned, making sure it's not just that they're made, from recycled content and not raw material, but how can that then be recycled again on the back end? So we run into this with drywall sometimes, right? Like how do we make sure that we reduce waste on the front end by selecting the proper drywall that can be recycled, things like that. So again, pointing back to that super important collaborative effort on the front end to make sure you have all parties in, to the design team to make sure they're thinking about that reuse adaptability on the back end, the constructability team sitting there telling is that viable and how much will it cost and what's the impact on the back end.
Right. We often hear actually from experts on sustainability that recycling should be the last option when you're thinking about end of life, right? Reuse and refurbishment and things like that are probably more important because recycling has, Julio spoke about this a little bit right at the beginning, recycling has its own carbon footprint, right? And it has its own energy use for the process. I'm going to bring in, Ryan, you spoke about Louise's question. I'm going to bring it up here, but then Julio, I'm going to come to you to talk a little bit more about that. Louise says, she's Louise from Milliken in the UK. So Milliken is of course a flooring manufacturer. What can we do about the disconnection in the process with the strip out of the building space prior to refurbishment and the fact that it is then too late to utilize the take back schemes that manufacturers offer? The strip out contractors rarely get in touch with the manufacturers to take responsibility for the products at the end of life. Yet most responsible manufacturers are well set up to deal with this. So currently I hear on flooring, our generally the take back rate for flooring is really at about 5% of the total volume of carpet that's being made. So manufacturers can take back their carpets, it's just not getting back to them. And recycling is itself a little challenging. So I'd love to get all of us to react to this problem of recycling. But first I want to bring Julio in as somebody who deals with the other side of recycling. Julio, can you just give us the example of how hard it was for you to actually source the nylon and handle it in the proper way to recycle it to turn into Econyl? Because I know when you were developing Econyl, there were a lot of challenges with that. And also tell us a little bit about the recycling process that you use, if you don't mind, because I just want to remind people that, melting down plastic is not the only way to recycle it, and that there's, that even that, how the plastic is recycled, even if it can be recycled, is also important. So Julio, tell us briefly about that, and then we'll react to Louise's comment.
Well, first of all, I tried to give you some numbers just to share, the size of what we are doing. So today we recycle more than 100 million pounds per year of nylon. So it's not a small effort, So you have to go around the world and find at least another 100 million pounds of waste, which, sounds easy because of the magnitude of waste that we produce. But of course, we need to find nylon waste. We cannot transform other materials into nylon. And this is the first problem. Second problem is to take it back. Logistically, everything is made to go to landfill, not certainly to come back, or to avoid to be in landfill. So this is the second challenge. Then the third problem is that what we are recycling today, for example, carpet or flooring or carpet tiles, were not made, I like to say, with the end in mind. So with the point to be at the end, when you are not able to repurpose them to recycle. So you have to disassemble something that has been made to last forever, possibly. So this is has not been easy for us to resolve. It's been a journey that has lasted some years. The first 2 or 3 were kind of nightmares, but now finally we are able to recycle. We recycle something like 30 million pounds of carpet flooring per year, more or less the same amount of fishing net that we source from all over the places, a lot of different plastic scraps, a lot of fabrics that we collect from our fashion customers, because you have to know that when you cut and sew, less than 1% of this kind of waste is currently recycled. So we have customers like Stella McCartney, Prada, Gucci that are sending back their waste. So of course, when they cut a backpack or a jacket, they make waste, they send them back to us. Before Econyl, they were sending to landfill, Now, clearly, when you make plastics, sometimes you fill this material with other stuff to improve the mechanical performances or to have, other kind of, features from it. So again, it will be a journey to take back this kind of products and then to understand how to extract the nylon from this product. It's a lot of research and development, a lot of capital expenditure. So please help me making products that are more easily recyclable, and then of course we can create better circularity.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, the problem with a lot of, if you think of carpet, carpet and drywall, which Ryan spoke about, are still relatively simple assemblies. I mean, now when you think of a chair, a task chair, an ergonomic task chair, it can be so complex in terms of the number of different types of engineered plastics and things like that going into it. So, which is why, we say recycling should be your last resort, but your absolute last resort is the landfill. So if you can do anything but don't send stuff to the landfill, right?
If you ask my wife, she goes and I don't know the name in English, but people who are collecting, waste stuff from construction. She goes there, she picks. She's an architect, by the way, but she's practicing only for myself, and she goes and buy everything, and then of course. She buys new fabric, and then she change the upholstery, or she change the colors. But whenever possible, she's trying to buy second-hand stuff. Imagine Mr. Joe Pont. How much he is worth today. Something coming from this famous designer. So please, if you make beautiful products. Maybe you can more easily sell them, 2 or 3 or 4 times, and you can even make money out of it.
Yeah.
Can I just something that I think we've all touched on a little bit is sort of recycling being your second to last resort, landfill being the last resort. We probably as an industry need to stop talking about end of life and talk about end of lease. And it's not something that designers are super comfortable talking about because we're not generally talking about anything past a warranty phase. But the reality is all of these products are really made to last so much longer than a 5-year lease or a 10-year lease. And that's furniture, that's flooring, that's lots of wall coverings. When cared for appropriately, there's a conversation that needs to start happening between the project team and the owners about long-term operations and maintenance and what does happen either when they outgrow a space or when the lease is up and they decide not to renew. It isn't an abandoned ship. It should be seen as an investment, especially with things like furniture that are sort of easily relocated. We need to probably start changing our lexicon a little bit and sort of reframe the question, because we're calling it end of life at the end of 5 years or 10 years, but that's really not true. It's sort of like we're cutting its life short, and we need to maybe think about it a different way.
Yeah, I want to add something real quick too, Avi. I think the other thing that is missing sometimes is proper documentation, a plan that kind of shows how do you execute maintenance and cleaning within your space, right? So that those materials have a longer lifespan. So making sure you have that proper maintenance along the way. Sometimes we run into issues with recycling carpet because it hasn't been maintained properly, and so there's those things around maintenance. There's also, whenever you're designing, have a disassembly plan in place. If you've designed for adaptive reuse, have that as a disassembly plan in place so that when a contractor comes in, we know what you had planned to refurbish or recycle and where it should go, what the makeup of it is and things like that, right? So I think that's some of the challenges we run into sometimes with recycling when we're doing disassembly and deconstruction is really looking at, we might not have the product information, right, to know what its next life cycle could be and how it can be recycled to make sure it doesn't have contaminants in it and things like that. So yeah, again, back to that proper planning, having protocols and things in place to have proper maintenance of your interior spaces is vital.
Absolutely. I mean, all of you bring up a really vital point, right? So yes, of course, designers need to take responsibility for the entirety of the use of their projects, and think about that end of lease or sort of next milestone in the design process. Because really, interior design, very different from ground up construction, architecture. Interior design is all very largely a process of passing the baton between one designer and another. Unless you're going into a space that is building that's just been constructed, invariably you're going into a space that some other interior designer has touched before you. You may see the effects of what they've done, or you may not, depending on whether it's been stripped already or not. But you're always going to a space that somebody else has touched. And by that logic, somebody else is always going to come into a space that you've designed at some point, right? Unless the building itself is torn down. So we have to think about the responsibility of our profession in different ways. So John, thank you so much for correcting our language around that. We have to find a better way of thinking about end of life. We have a question from Helen Evans Warren, I think that connects to you, what you said, Ryan, about that design for disassembly. Maybe we can spend a couple of minutes just talking about that, John. How do we consider design for disassembly as part of the design process? And then we have a few other great questions here.
Yeah, I think disassembly is definitely a component or a strategy for getting back into the circular economy and also reducing embodied carbon. I think, often we think about disassembly when we think of maybe workstations or systems furniture or things like that. We're having conversations with clients about things like demountable partitions. It's a systems approach that allows for future flexibility. I mean, you could take it with you when you leave. Is that a value that the client is interested in? Because there's a different way of designing for that, but it also offers a wide variety of possibilities. And that's sort of taking that disassembly to the next level, where we're actually disassembling the partitions. I think part of it is explaining the value of disassembly to the end user. And I do think it goes back to Ryan's point too about documentation. We don't touch the space 10 years from now when the lease is up, or 5 years from now. Ryan's team probably wouldn't either. So how do we create the paper trail so that in 10 years that end user knows what to do with the demountable system? Certainly would love for them to call us back, and help them replan the space. But even for recycling carpet, like, how do they know the right manufacturer to call to recycle the carpet? So a lot of it is not just like the discussion about design for disassembly. It's also, how do we create the ability for the follow through?
Right. I think too, Avi, it's important to make sure when you're gathering that documentation, use a great, cool new platform, right? That's digital, that makes it user-friendly, where it can be, we've started to try to drive clients towards using 3D models that we can convert into document control for maintenance purposes, things that can even send you notifications like, hey, it's time to change your filters. Or if you have a piece of equipment that goes bad, all the maintenance and specifications of that piece of equipment. You can view virtually where it is within your building portfolio, and then make a swap, right? So I think knowing that it shouldn't be, a 3-ring binder like we used to do that gets dropped off in a facilities maintenance closet and then probably never used again and then lost by the time we get ready to do a refurbishment, right? So yeah, using your technological new platforms that are innovative to help continue to keep that information engaged.
Right. Absolutely. Emily Hundley asked something that I think also Dinesh lower down is asking about, pretty much the same thing, which is, Emily says, how economic is it to design with net zero goals in mind? Does it drive up the cost of materials and projects? And with everything with sustainability, we invariably run up against this wall. There's still, of course, this question about a green premium, but specifically with net zero goals, is it more costly to do a net zero project? And maybe Ryan, you're the best person to answer that first, and then if the others want to jump in, they can do that.
It depends. Yeah, it's usually my answer to this. When people ask what's a LEED premium, what's a well building standard premium, it depends. It's so dependent on your baseline and what your conceptual level focus is. If sustainability at the high performing building is your baseline, that's what you're going in with, then achieving that is significantly less costly than if you start out with a baseline of, we just really want a basic simple structure. Here's the programming we need in it. We want some of these high-end finishes, but we don't care as much about the carbon in them. And then you tack it on in the end. That's when it becomes significantly more pricey, right? So again, I think the other thing is when, we get engaged too late for the procurement period, and John can probably allude to this some, and as well as Julia, but when you're looking for products that meet certain specifications, they may be more expensive or may not, but the procurement timeline could be a little bit longer, right? Because they're more of a niche in some areas right now. So it's always a better economic approach to make sure that you're proactive in selecting those materials as early as possible, get them in your procurement line, and things like that. And again, making sure that you're driving that collaboration to minimize other economic impacts that you would see as far as like clashing issues and things like that when you're fitting out a new space.
Right. Absolutely. A quick aside here, Barbara, I see your question. Oh, thank you. I was going to ask you what you meant. We have a question here from Ben Taylor, and I think Barbara is referring that to what product evaluation systems have you found most valuable when researching products? So Ryan and John, if you want to, just tell us a couple of the tools or resources that people might generally find available to evaluate products, that would be great.
Quite honestly, a lot of manufacturers have EPDs on their websites as part of their product data suites, whether, right along with the specifications. So there is some value to individual research, but I think Ryan just put in the chat Econyl, which is a great aggregator. Mindful Materials has a lot of good information, especially with finishes. But I think there is no one silver bullet just yet when it comes specifically to embodied carbon. And I think all of us have alluded to the fact that there's multiple groups certifying EPDs. There's multiple ways to categorize different levels of carbon reduction. So until there is something more uniform and agreed upon throughout the design and construction industry, it is still something that you do have to do some research on and really feel comfortable with sort of comparing and contrasting. It looks like Ryan's also put in the Carbon Leadership Forum. They actually produce an annual report benchmarking lots of typical products in the construction industry. So if you're looking for a place to start, and you need sort of a high, low, and median, for example, of ceiling tile or drywall, they produce a great annual report that helps us understand where the market is before you actually even go to specific product data.
Yeah, and these are both free resources, which is why I dropped them in there. DPR sponsors our Econyl site, so that's available to anyone. I encourage you to check it out. And then, yeah, like John mentioned, EC3 is one of the free tools that we have that's using some industry standard algorithms, around more of the main building structure materials and stuff. And so some really great content to dive into there as you start initial assessment.
We use EC3, and we also use Tally, which is a plugin that works with your Revit model to help figure out your total carbon.
And I believe, John, I've heard recently that there's going to be a collaboration with Tally and EC3. There's a merger happening, so yes, more to come there, which is exciting.
It's getting incrementally, I wouldn't say easier, but incrementally smoother, shall we say.
We're working towards that standardization where we can all start getting on the same page. And so these are some of the cool things that are getting us there.
Yeah, it's really great, and also different tools are trying to make sure that they can be integrated with others, so because, it's also important, I think, to understand which tools, as John was saying, are useful for what. I mean, EC3 is fantastic, but it's really about your big ticket items in an interior. So, ceilings, walls, there's not a lot of furniture in EC3 yet. So some things you may not find there. The carbon leadership for material baselines, kind of a similar thing. You can put a baseline for most architectural products in there, and interior structural materials. Again, if the flooring is in the material baselines, those are really useful. But mindful materials, which I think Ryan also mentioned, John mentioned, I'm sorry, really, addresses other product categories. So, it's a useful way to look at stuff. And then there's so many management platforms available now. Recently at a Metropolis event, we had a demonstration by Matter, who are integrated with mindful materials, and then EC3 and Tally, which is a great lifecycle assessment tool, are now integrated. So there's really an ecosystem of tools that's being built. And luckily, they're all starting to kind of find ways to integrate with each other, which is a really good sign for our industry. This is the right time to start getting interested in this stuff and to start looking into it, because even if there are some challenges right now, those are being resolved. So it's a very optimistic time, actually, when it comes to evaluation systems. So even though you hear all of us complain about, how tough it is and how many tools there are and how there's no standard, dive in anyway, because that's coming. Okay. We have a quick question here from David Bergman. David, thanks so much for joining us today. David says, for the life cycle, for end of life extension, what about extended producer responsibility, putting the onus on manufacturers? My question is in terms of FF&E, not the design of the space. So do manufacturers have a role to play in terms of, do they take responsibility for taking back their product? We think about warranty, but I wonder if anybody wants to comment on that. Is that even a viable model?
Well, wherever there are extended producer responsibility system in place, we see the recycling rate growing dramatically. Clearly, if it is apparently easy to draw a system for bottles, it's a little more complicated maybe to have a system for interiors. But nevertheless, for example, in Europe, the Carpet Association here in Europe is working as an industry to try to be proactive with our European Commission, which is like your parliament in Washington. So to try to make some proposal, because they know that sooner or later something will come from the legislation. So it is better to try to find a way to be, in my opinion, proactive, and then propose something that makes sense. Sometimes on the other side, you may find other kind of problems. For example, you in California, you have an EPR scheme in place for carpet flooring, but you don't have it for other floor coverings. So you risk to have some kind of inequalities, because flooring are targeted as something that must be diverted from landfill, and I'm happy with it, collecting those carpets. But of course, there are other floorings like LVTs or many, cement or whatever you like, that they should have also similar extended producer responsibility program in places. But in my opinion, these are the most powerful tools in order to have a better future.
Thanks so much, Giulio. Yes, very powerful, but need to be implemented uniformly. We're going to take our very last question here today. So before we do that, a huge thanks to Econyl by Aquafil for making today's discussion possible. And a big thanks to DPR and Perkins and Will for joining us for today's discussion. Thank you so much, Ryan, John, and Giulio. It's been amazing to have you on here today. Our last question is a big picture question. So, but I think it's a really important one. I'm first going to read out a comment by Tina Jajadze here. She says, often the best way to reduce carbon footprint is to use as few finished products as possible. Recent trends celebrate this direction in workplace interiors and some hospitality projects, but how about influencing codes and regulation in more complex buildings such as healthcare and education? So there is, as John spoke a little bit about, if you all remember right in the beginning, there is an aesthetic sort of angle to this interior design. It's not all about just rationalizing products and putting them in digital tools. It's also about the experience of space. It's about health, and it's about look and feel and how a space feels like. And there is a trend recently to celebrate using fewer materials, using recycled materials, and so on and so forth. So Tina, thanks so much for finding this out. It is more prevalent in workplace and hospitality, less so. Nobody wants to come into an adaptive reuse hospital just yet. But hopefully that will happen because it needs to. So I want to bring up Harry Ross's question here. Harry says, to that point, do designers in media need to start talking about beauty and trends in a new way? I'll just quickly say from the media side, yes. But if everybody wants to jump in on the design side, how do we talk about aesthetics, beauty, and things like that in new ways to support this goal to ultimately impact, the climate crisis, but also the health of our communities?
I'm sitting here in front of an exposed surface, so maybe this is a good example of balancing aesthetics, because on the other side of this room is a fabric wrap panel system that was not just for aesthetics and beauty, but also for acoustics. So I think some of it is about balance. It is, I do think we as an industry need to start celebrating the integrity of materials a bit more and showcasing them. But I also think technology has brought us so far, and Julio is a great example of that, in terms of the ability to recycle and repurpose and put out something new that is old at the same time. I think there's a balance there where we have to take the goals of the project and understand how we can both celebrate the beauty and the integrity of the actual materials, wood, brick, concrete, etc., but also use the technologically enhanced materials that we have to create really pleasing, memorable spaces. And the lower embodied carbon at the end of the day just makes the narrative of that story all that much richer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm going to capitalize on that too and say I get a good bit of comments on my chair here, which is old skis that we turned in. So it's make something unique out of a recycled content too. But I think the biggest factor in all of this is looking at the interconnectedness between human health and environmental health. And so I think that's where we've really fallen short. I mean, EPA says we spend 90% of our time indoors, yet we have really neglected to look significantly into our interior environments and how it's affecting us as humans. And so I think bringing that full circle within sustainability now is really starting to set the pace of why beauty, place, health, and all this is interconnected and why it matters so much. So excited about kind of this newfound approach of really bringing it full circle and how we think about our built environment, not only how it affects our natural environment, but the environments that we live in every day and how it impacts human health.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, if we don't make beautiful products, at the end of the day, consumers will not buy them. So we have to find a way to make them beautiful and, of course, also environmentally good, because if not, we have a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I think all of you make really valid points there. We really need to think about beauty as a way to, as a vehicle. If people don't enjoy the spaces we design, if they don't feel comfortable, if it doesn't support their health, there's no, we often say there's no use of a net zero building that makes people sick. There exists no such net zero building. I will say net zero buildings don't make people sick, but what I'm saying is that it's impossible for us to chase one goal without also looking at all the others. So thank you all so much for reinforcing that. It's really, really important and absolutely vital as we take on this new frontier in interior design. One last time, thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks to all our panelists. We have lots of exciting programming coming up. If you want to hear Bill Walsh, the founder of the Healthy Building Network, talk more about sort of the connections between climate, health, and equity, join us for our Product Live segment on the 24th next week. Also next week, we're going to be talking about an office for all the senses, basically looking at multisensory design as a way of addressing, of course, sustainability, but also inclusivity in the space, in office spaces, trying to figure out how we can look at multisensory design as a way of looking at, neurodiversity, equity, material health, and trying to maybe use that as a new aesthetic sort of goal for us for workplace interiors. So join us for that discussion next week. Lots of exciting stuff coming up with Metropolis. I hope you will stay in touch with us. Today's discussion will be available on our website in a couple of weeks' time. It will also be available on DesignTV by SANDOW next week. So look out for that. That runs on our website, on Interior Design's website, as well as our Facebook pages. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for a fantastic discussion to our panelists. And of course, thank you to Econyl by Aquafil for making this discussion possible. Have a great day, everyone.